chapter 31. We're going to begin today a 3-week series on this psalm, on this one chapter, Psalm 31. Several years ago, I was participating in a retreat that I was asked to attend, so I went to this retreat. And it was one of these retreats where people gathered from all around the nation, and for a couple of days, 2 nights and maybe 3 days, we were meeting in this one particular location, and we had different activities and prayer times, and a lot of it was trying to develop our spiritual life and to deepen our spiritual life. And one of the afternoons was dedicated to the theme of trust. And so all afternoon we were supposed to be doing activities that would build trust. And one of them was we were partnered up with somebody we didn't know, and we took turns blindfolding each other and leading each other around. I don't know why we try to be spiritual in some other way than just reading the Bible and praying, but we were at this retreat, and so this is going to teach us trust. So I'm assigned to this guy. I'd never met him before, and I'm sure he's a fine guy, probably a Christian guy. I mean, he came to the retreat. He had to have some interest in spiritual things. And so he's the guy. He blindfolds me. He's leading me around. I'm supposed to be learning trust. We'd rented a school for this retreat, and I could tell we were going up a flight of steps, and then we were on a landing, and then we're up another flight of steps, and then we're on a landing. I'm blindfolded, but you can tell. And then we go up another flight of steps, and then he stops me and he says, "Now, Mark, out in front of you there's a long hallway. And if you trust me, I want you to just take off running and know that I will yell to you in time to stop. Because at the end of that hallway, there's stairways just like the ones we came up. So, Mark, do you trust me?" "Oh, yeah, I trust you. I trust you." "You believe I wouldn't let any harm?" "No, I believe you wouldn't harm me." "Well, then go, run." And I just stood there. And I turned to him and I said, "Well, you know what? It's not that I don't trust you, but what if I don't hear you when you yell for me to stop?" So he said, "Well, I'll yell like this." And he yelled as loud as he could. It just echoed. We were the only ones up there. It just echoed through there. He goes, "You'll hear me." I said, "Yeah." "You trust me?" "Oh, yeah." He says, "Oh, so run." So I didn't run. I turned to him a second time. I said, "Well, you've never seen me run. You really don't know how fast I am." And he goes, "Well, I'll get a pretty good idea the first few strides." I said, "Well, do you have any idea how much I weigh?" "Well, no." I said, "Well, if you don't know how fast I am, if you don't know how much I weigh, you don't know how long it's going to take me to stop from the time I hear you yell stop to when I actually get stopped. Oh, it's not going to be that hard, so just go. Do you trust me? Go ahead and go." So finally I had to just take off my blindfold and said, "You know what? I don't trust you." He said, "Oh, don't worry, there's plenty more time. There's more activities." I said, "This day's not long enough for me to trust you. Let's just go get refreshments. I don't trust you." And that's what we did. He didn't even make me lead him around blindfolded. I mean, we just admitted right there, we're not going to trust each other. We can love each other, but we're not going to trust each other. Now that was kind of looking back, kind of a silly little exercise and of no real consequence since I didn't actually run. It could have been a consequence had I ran, had he not stopped me in time. And a couple of broken legs was not worth it to me to see if I trusted this guy or not. I'm just going to tell him right up front, I don't. But in life, it's things that are far more important than some silly little exercise. All of us would say, "I wish I trusted the Lord more." If I were to take a survey here today, every one of us would say, "Yeah, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, but I think I could trust Him more, and life would be so much better if I trusted Him more, but how can I learn to trust?" And that's what this series is going to be all about. I was talking to a friend of mine who has dedicated his life to missions. I won't mention his name nor his countries, but he gave his whole adult life to missions, and now, because of circumstances that are beyond his control, he can't do anything about it. He can't return to the field. He has invested so much of his life in the field, and there's this frustration and this discouragement that he can't be back on the field after more than 30 years of serving God in other countries as a missionary. Now he can't do it. And I was challenged by one of the things he said to me. And I'm thinking as he's saying this, what he's accomplished in his life. Literally, no exaggeration. There have been hundreds of churches planted and born and growing because of this man's ministry and the offshoots of his ministry and the fruit of his ministry. And he said to me, "Mark, looking back on my life now, I have one regret. I wish I had prayed more." I was always a worker, a servant, a doer, and I will continue to do that if God enables me. But now I see how much more could have been done had I prayed more. If I could live my life all over again, I would have prayed more. And boy, that challenged me. When I see a man that has accomplished so much, and yet he himself says, I wish I had prayed more. If I could do my life over again, I would have prayed more. And then we were talking about his circumstances that were holding him from going, and all I could say to him was, life is a journey of trust. Life is a journey of learning how to trust the Lord. And so many things happen that we can't control. So many things happen that we wouldn't have planned it out that way. We just have to trust. And yet all of us would admit, I need to trust God more. I wish I could trust Him more. And we're going to study Psalm 31 under the theme of learning to trust. Why Psalm 31? Because at the moment in the life of Jesus Christ, when He needed to trust His Father more than at any other moment in His earthly life, He turned to this psalm. This is the psalm that was on the mind of Jesus at that moment in His own life where He had to trust the Father, where He had to totally let go, where He could do nothing but trust His Heavenly Father. And so if Jesus turned to this psalm for trust, for inspiring trust, then certainly we should also. Psalm 31. Before we look at the psalm, let me give you a few little insights as to how to read the Psalms. And these next few minutes, I'm setting you up not only for the rest of the series, but for your own personal study of the Psalms. There are many different types of literature in the Bible, and we need to learn how to interpret each different type the way it was written. And I'm not saying that it is not completely inspired by God. It is, but it is in the form of a type of literature, a certain genre of literature. And the Psalms were written, all 150 of them, in Hebrew poetry. And we want to understand a little bit about Hebrew poetry. There are many characteristics to Hebrew poetry that we need to keep in mind when we read the Psalms. And for Psalm 31, I'm only going to mention today two of them. One is what the scholars call parallelism. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying repetition. Structured repetition. When you read through the Psalms, you'll see words and themes and sometimes word-for-word sentences are repeated. It's because it's a form of Hebrew poetry. Don't think of poetry like we think of poetry. You know, roses are red, violets are blue, I like donuts, how about you? And everything's got a rhyme. And that's not the same kind of poetry. But Hebrew poetry uses parallelism, which is structured repetition. Why? Not because the psalmist can't move on to the next point, but this is the important thing I want you to remember. When something is repeated, that which is repeated always advances what was said before. Let me give you a couple examples right from our psalm, even before we read the whole thing. But in Psalm chapter 31, we see, for example, it says rock. Right away in the first couple of verses, it says rock. You, Lord, you are my rock. And then it says, you are my fortress. Well, keep in mind how that's a repetition. It's the same word in some cases. Here it isn't. But rock, fortress. Sometimes a rock is also called a fortress. At one time in the psalm, he says, Lord, be my rock, be my fortress. He's crying out to God. And then when he repeats it, he says, Lord, you are my rock, you are my fortress. There's been an advancement of that theme. Could we have that picture of the rock up? And those of us here in the room, just look at this picture of a rock. This is a rock. This is the kind of rock that he was talking about. It's a boulder. It's not like a pebble you get in your shoe. It's a rock. He says, Lord, you are my rock. You're solid. You're strong. I can stand on you. I can use you as a foundation. But now he uses the term fortress, which comes from the same kind of word, rock. But look at this picture. This is Masada. This is also in some context called a rock. Look at how high that, look, it's a fortress. And so he says rock, but then he says fortress, and he advances. Let's look at the next picture of Masada. Look at that. Wouldn't you be safe up there? If you could get all the way up there and you had food and water and supply, that's security. That's more than that first picture, isn't it? Rock. Okay, thank you. But now also, notice he talks about deliverance in verse 1, in verse 2 and in verse 15, he uses the word deliver. Deliver me now, Lord. And so 3 times he says, deliver me, deliver me. And we say, why is he repeating that? Well, the first word for to deliver is the Hebrew word palat. And here's what palat means. It means to quietly slip out. Like some of you, you know, you want to catch that football score and the preacher's getting awfully long-winded. And so when I look down at my notes, you're going to slip out. And nobody's going to see you slipping out. It's just going to be a quiet. And you've been delivered from this. You've slipped out. And so in the beginning of the psalm, he says, Lord, deliver me. In other words, let me just slip out. But later on in the psalm, he uses another word. In verses 2 and 15, it's the word not Saul. And not Saul doesn't just mean a quiet slipping, sneaking out. This word means to snatch or to grab by force. The picture here, it even says, do it speedily. The picture here is if a bunch of armed guards came marching into this room and pushed their way down the aisle to you and grabbed you and pulled you out of here. And then said, now you can go watch your football game. And you said, whew, been delivered. See, one was real forceful, one was real strong and aggressive, and the other was just kind of quiet. Well, it's a repetition of the word deliver, but it's a different word in the Hebrew. And see how he advances it. But even the idea of enemy in the psalm, in verse 4, he just says, they've hidden a net for me. So now you get an idea. There's people that are against him. They're doing something to get him. He said, they've hidden a net for me. He calls them enemies in verse 8. So they have ill intent. So now we know that. But then if you were to read verses 11 through 13, he talks about his enemies again, but only it's advanced. He says, they're whispering about me. They're scheming about me. They're plotting about me. They're trying to take my life. I'm a reproach to them. They say I'm a broken vessel. Now we've got more detail. It's advanced. And so when you read the Psalms, be looking for these things. Be looking for these this repetition and what it means in a psalm. Also, another characteristic of the psalm is imagery. In other words, it doesn't just say, God helps me. It says, God is my rock. God is my fortress. It doesn't just say, for example, God cares for me. It says, God is my shepherd. It uses images. It uses pictures to communicate it. And it's a beautiful way of communication by using this rich imagery. But something you probably already noticed about the Psalms, the Psalms are unlike other types of literature in that the Psalms appeal to the whole man, and the Psalms, more than any other type of literature in the Scripture, appeal to your emotions. They get your emotions involved. They express emotion, and sometimes those emotions are not right, but they're still expressed. For example, notice in our text in verses 21 through 23, he says, in my alarm I said, Lord, I'm cut off from you. Now the psalmist David is admitting it. He's saying, I got all emotional. In my alarm, I said, I'm cut off from you. Well, did he really believe he was cut off from God? You read the rest of the psalm. No, he didn't. But it was his emotion. It was what he was feeling. And there are some pretty ugly passages in the Psalms. Read Psalm 109, and it says about those that were persecuting the psalmist. It says, I wish their children were fatherless, and I wish their mother's sin were never blotted out. I mean, he just gets carried away saying, I hope their parents die, and I hope their mother goes to hell. And I mean, literally, that's what it means. I hope her sins are never blotted out. Now, is that good theology? Is that the way we ought to be feeling? No. But come on now. Aren't there times in your experience that you felt that way? And the psalm is trying to make a connection with you and connecting with your wholeness, connecting with your emotions. If you read through the whole psalm, the psalmist usually calms down and puts things in perspective. Psalm 137, verse 9, talking about payback for Babylon, he goes, happy is the one that dashes their little ones on a rock. And you say, wait a minute, calm down. Get in control of your emotions. Now, that's not promoting that. He's just expressing emotion. And so I think when you read the Psalms, as you're reading through the Psalms, you're going to be reading things that in your mind you say, wow, he shouldn't be saying that. But guess what? You felt that too. And just like the psalmist had to work through his emotions and bring his emotions to God and stand before God as an emotional being as well as a rational being, as well as a spiritual being. So the Psalms stir up our emotions and confront our emotions. I love that part when David admits it. He says, in my alarm, I said I'm cut off. In other words, things started happening and I panicked and I thought I was cut off from God. Really, I wasn't, but I felt that way. And you think about your life, and there's many times in your life that you've felt that way too, haven't you? That, God, where are you? God, you forgot about me. How about the psalm where he says, why are you so cast down, O my soul? He's admitting, I'm discouraged, I'm feeling down. He's telling himself the right answer. He's saying, hope thou in God. But he's admitting, I feel really cast down. You know, there are times that I think it would be very healthy for us just to almost, as it were, create our own psalm. When you've got some emotions going on inside of you, and maybe in your mind you're saying, those emotions probably aren't right, I probably shouldn't be feeling these things. Why don't you just turn them into a prayer to God? And have a prayer session and begin to worship the Lord and express your emotions to God. And I'll guarantee you, by the time your prayer session is over, you'll get a lot of things back in order. And the Psalms are written to appeal to the whole man. They're written to connect with our emotions as well. Now, this next point I want to make about interpreting the Psalms, and we'll jump into Psalm 31. I have a lot of fun with this one. And that is, in most of the Psalms, the historical setting of the psalm is veiled. It's hidden, but it's hinted at. So its historicity is hinted at, but veiled. In all of the psalms, of all 150 of them, there are only 14 psalms that come right out and tell you the historical setting. If you look at some of the psalms in the 50s, for example, Psalm 56, 59, it'll just come right out and tell you this was written by David when he was in the cave. This was written by David when Saul sent men to spy his house. It tells you that, but only 14 out of 150. The rest of the time, it's veiled. It's kind of hinted at what's going on, and we'll see that today, but it doesn't come out and tell you. Why is that? Because the Psalms are to have a universal appeal. They are to apply to all situations. And see, in our minds, we would limit them. For example, Psalm 59, it says that this psalm was written when Saul sent men to spy out David's house. He had given him his daughter in marriage, was trying to trap him, trying to kill him. Well, we know the historical setting of that. Now, don't be tempted to say, well, I don't need that psalm unless I have trouble with my in-laws. If I start having conflict with my in-laws, then I'll read Psalm 59. No, we have a tendency to want to categorize everything. So most of the Psalms, the historical setting is purposely veiled, yet hinted at. And I'm going to have fun with that today. Let's ask the question, what is the background of Psalm 31? I know it's a long introduction, but it's going to have to do you for 3 weeks' worth. But what is the historical setting of Psalm 31? When you know the historical setting, the words have a much richer, deeper meaning. Now, scholars are debating this one, and there's two options. In 1 Samuel chapter 23, there's a town called Keilah, and it's about to get overrun by the Philistines, and David prays, Lord, should I go deliver Keilah? And God says, yes, go. So he goes, but while he's inside the city, he gets this feeling, hey, they might betray me. And so he prays, Lord, are they going to betray me? And the Lord said, yeah, get out of here. So he leaves. Now, some people think Psalm 31 was written during that time, but there's another option that I think fits it better. It's 2 Samuel 15 through 18, where Absalom is rebelling against David. Remember the story? His own son, Absalom, has been systematically for a few years stealing the hearts of the people, lying about David, conspiring with people because he wants to usurp the throne away from David. And then he makes his move, and David has to flee away. Now, let me share with you. Go ahead and turn to Psalm 31. Let me share with you just a few of these words that are kind of veiled, but I think it's hinting at when it was written, and that'll help us understand it more. Look at verses 9 and 10 of Psalm 31. Verses 9 and 10 of Psalm 31. And ask yourself this question. Does this sound like a young man or an old man talking? Verses 9 and 10 of Psalm 31. He says, be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, my soul and my body also. For my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of mine iniquity, and my bones waste away. I don't know about you, but I don't know too many young people that talk about their bones wasting away. Now, we know in the latter part of David's life, he was sick for a while. The Keilah story was when he was a young man, but the Absalom story is when he's an older man. So that kind of fits. He's saying, my life, my bones are wasting away, and he's kind of indicating maybe that this is later on in his life. Look at verse 11. Because all my adversaries I become a reproach, especially to my neighbors. Well, if you have neighbors, that means you live there. You don't just come in to rescue them. No, he's living in Jerusalem. He never really lived in Keilah. But notice he says they're whispering about me. They're scheming about me. This is verses 11 through 13. They're plotting against me. Doesn't that fit what Absalom was doing? Whispering to people in the gate, plotting to have David thrown off the throne. But here's the one that clinches it for me. Two of them, actually. It says, I am to them a broken vessel. A broken vessel. Notice, I'm not good for what I used to be good for. I'm a broken vessel. I used to be the king. They all acknowledge me as king, but now they're saying I'm a broken vessel. I'm not good for what I used to be. So that would fit David later on in his life when Absalom is driving him from the throne. Verse 21, some of your translations don't catch this, but verse 21 literally says, your steadfast love to me when I was in a besieged city. So he's writing about an experience he had when he was in a besieged city. Well, when Absalom got about 30,000 men surrounding Jerusalem, demanding the throne, I would call that a besieged city. And David had to sneak out the back door, as it were, to get away. He was in a besieged city. So I'm going to take the assumption that Psalm 31 was written about that time in his life when Absalom was rebelling against him. And literally, what a time to have to trust the Lord when you're losing everything. And when your emotions are all amok. This isn't just having a bad day in the job. His own son has betrayed him. His life is in the balance, and he's losing everything. He has to trust the Lord. And so he's going to write about how he found this trust in the Lord during this time of his life. Now, Psalm 31 is broken down in an outline. It simply goes like this. The first section is a prayer and then an expression of trust. The second section is a prayer and an expression of trust. And then the third section is just a thanksgiving because of trust. It's all about trust. Trust is repeated, and it's built upon trust. So we're looking at this psalm, learning to trust. Well, let's read the first part of it, shall we? And I'm going to read from the English Standard Version. It captures some words here the way I think it's very beautiful. Listen to these words. We're going to look at several verses, 1 through 8 of Psalm 31. Read the whole thing this week. And we're going to be dissecting this psalm and really getting to know it. He says, In you, O Lord, do I take refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In your righteousness, deliver me. Incline your ear to me and rescue me speedily. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. For you are my rock and my fortress, and for your name's sake you lead me and guide me. You take me out of the net they have hidden for me. You are my refuge. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. I hate those that pay regard to worthless idols. There's these emotions again. I hate those guys. But I trust in the Lord. I will rejoice and be glad in your steadfast love, because you have seen my affliction. You have known the distress of my soul. You have not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. You have set my feet in a broad place. Well, that's what we're going to be studying today, just those first 8 verses, because that's really the way the passage breaks down. That's the first section. And we see a prayer. Rescue me, Lord. Be my rock. Be my fortress. Help me. Get me out of this. Let me either sneak out or snatch me out, but get me out of this, God. It's a prayer. But it's also a great declaration of trust. Number 1 point, images of trust. Look at verses 1 through 4. All of these words are... The imagery here is rich in terms of trust. He says, you're my rock. Notice in verse 1, he says, in you I take refuge. Some of your translations said, in you I trust, because the word that is used here, write it down, it's the Hebrew word chasah. There are 2 main words in the Hebrew language for trust. There are many that are translated trust, but these are the 2 main ones. And the one used here is chasah. And if you were to do a study, you can get the study guide, look up all the passages. Some of them are on the screen. You would see that the word chasah it means to run to flee to take refuge in. That's why it's translated the way it is in verse 1. In you I take refuge. It could also say, in you I trust, in you I flee. I flee to you, I run to you. If you were to look up all the references in the Psalms where chasa is used, almost all of them are the context of trouble and persecution. It has to do with where you run when you're in trouble. And we see this word repeated 3 times in the Psalm, each time built upon. So here's the first question that I'm going to ask you. Where do you run when you're in trouble? So, well, we all would want to say, I run to the Lord. And David said, you're my refuge. You're the place I run to for safety. That's trust. Trust is wherever you run when you're in trouble. And for example, Psalm 2:12 says, blessed is the man that trusts in you, and uses the word chasa. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in you. But here's an amazing application. In Acts 4, the early church has just experienced Pentecost, and they've just experienced a great miracle of healing and a revival, but now persecution breaks loose. They are threatened, they are beaten, and so they gather together to pray, and they call upon Psalm 2, trusting the Lord. See, where do they run? They run to the Lord. They run to the Lord in prayer. And so here's the image. The image is of a fortress made of rock, and when the enemy comes, I run into that fortress. That's the imagery. But one word we could use is trust. You trust what you run into. You trust what you're depending on to protect you and to provide for you and to keep you safe. So this word chasa, it's Psalm 61 where he says, Lord, when my heart is being overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And it talks about trust. Again, the imagery of rock, fortress, running to for safety. Now, there is another word used for trust in the Hebrew, and it is the word batak. Batak. So the first word is chasa. It's used in our text, Psalm 31, but the other word, main word, is batak. And batak doesn't mean to run to. Batak means to lean upon. Kind of a different thought. You're not running to something, you're leaning upon something. Now, if you were to do a study of batak in the Psalms, and you can get that off the study guide, look up all the passages, you'll see that the immediate context of batak is almost always praise. See, you're not in any immediate danger, but you're just praising, you're worshiping. And here's the point I want to give you today. You trust what you run to, but you run to what you lean on. Whatever you're leaning on when times are good is what you're going to run to when there's trouble. And if you want to make sure that you run to the Lord in a time of trouble, then learn how to lean upon Him now. Learn to worship Him and bless Him and depend. Why should you pray every single day? Why should you never miss a day of prayer, of set aside time to pray? The man that misses days without praying is a man that says, I don't need God. So I would never say, well, you live that way. You live as if you don't need God. Because if you know you need God, you pray. And didn't Jesus say, how are we to pray? Give us day by day our daily bread. But I'm not in any trouble today. Yeah, but you still need to depend on Him today. You still need to lean on Him today. You still need to worship Him and exalt Him today. Sometimes when we get in trouble, then we say, oh man, I got to pray. You do. That's where you need to run. But we should have been leaning there anyway. You and I need the Lord as much when we are not in trouble as when we are in trouble. And so we need to lean upon Him every day so that when the crisis comes, when our Absalom arises, when we're driven from our city, when people say we're a broken vessel, we run to the right place. See, there are a lot of people, they run to the Lord, and they're really not really getting to the Lord. Maybe they run to the church, they try to get somebody to pray for them, but they haven't been daily leaning on the Lord, so they're struggling to trust. If you want to learn trust, you need to balance out both times in your life of chasa, where do you run when there's trouble, and batah, where do you lean when there's not trouble. That's how we learn trust. Some of you know these psalms, these hymns of the faith. How about this one? Learning to lean on Jesus. Finding more power than I ever dreamed, I'm learning to lean on Jesus. A joy I can't explain is filling my soul since the day I met Jesus, my King. His blessed Holy Spirit is leading my way. He's teaching me, and I'm learning to lean. There's a glorious victory each day now for me as I dwell in His presence. So Cyrene, He helps me with each task. If only I ask, every day now I'm learning to lean. Shouldn't that be our daily song? Not just those words, but our attitude. Lord, today I need to lean on You. How about leaning on the everlasting arms? What a fellowship. What a joy divine. Leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness. What peace is mine. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Safe and secure from all alarm. Leaning on the everlasting arms. What have I to fear? What have I to dread? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I have blessed peace with my Lord so near. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning on the everlasting arms. I want to ask you today, did you lean on His arms? Tomorrow, will you lean on His arms? This is the imagery of trust that the psalmist is trying to teach us, that God is a rock to be stood upon every day. But when there's trouble, He's a fortress to be run to. God is a rock that He is to be the foundation of everything we do every day. But He's also a Masada, where we find refuge when the enemy comes. Leaning and running. These are the words of images of trust. The Lord is our rock. Read Deuteronomy chapter 32. He talks about all the other nations and how they failed because the Lord wasn't their rock. That's an image of trust. A defender, yes, but a foundation. I want you to think of those two themes. A defender, that's when I'm in trouble. But a foundation, that's where my daily living is to be, on the foundation, the rock. See, I can build, I can put weight upon the rock, but when there's a storm, I can get behind the rock. He's my fortress as well. Leaning. You will run to whatever you lean on. I read an illustration. I want to share it with you. It happened up in Yosemite Park. A guy by the name of Ben Patterson was hiking with some friends, and the hike was only, the coverage was only 2,000 feet up is all they were going. But here's the problem. They had to cross a glacier to do it. And he got separated from his hiking buddies, and he found himself on some rock and surrounded by ice. And then there was some other rock where he knew he had to get there to get safe. And yet there was a sheet of ice, 45-degree angled ice between him. Only 10 feet, but was at a 45-degree angle of ice. And he knew if he slipped off that ice, he would fall down onto the glacier, and he would slide on that glacier. And that glacier didn't end for 50 miles. I mean, this is a precarious situation. And his other friends were experienced hikers, and they found him. They were up on this rock, looking down 10 feet below him with this sheet of ice, 45-degree angled ice. If he fell off of that, he hits the glacier, and he's gone for 50 miles. And so they had a long axe, and they reached over the side, and they chipped some footholds in that ice that was at that 45-degree angle. And they said, here's all you have to do. They made it sound so simple. Here's all you have to do. You have to reach up with your leg and put it in that first foothold. And as soon as you touch, you have to swing your other leg over into the next foothold. You'll then be high enough for us to grab you. Sounds simple enough. Put one foot in a foothold, then swing the other one up. But then they said this. Here's what you got to be careful, though. Listen to us. We're experienced hikers. This is what gets most hikers, makes them fall. You're going to have the natural inclination to want to hug into the mountain. Once you put that first foot in the foothold, you're going to want to fall into the mountain. You're going to want to get as close to the mountain as you can. You can't do that. Because what happens when your chest goes forward, everything below your hips goes back. And you're trying to get your foot in this foothold. They said you're going to have to fight off that natural inclination to lean into the mountain. As a matter of fact, when you're swinging that second foot around, you literally have to lean back just a little bit. Can you imagine the feeling of leaning back just a little bit when you're on ice and you know if you fall, you won't end up your slide for another 50 miles? And what they were basically telling him was, in order for us to rescue you, you have to go against your natural inclinations. You have to do the opposite of what would be natural to do. And you know what Ben wrote in the article, I believe is so true? He did it. It only took 2 seconds, and he leaned back, and they rescued him. He didn't slide for 50 miles. But he said there are many times in life, in order for God to rescue us, we have to do the opposite of our natural inclination. Our natural inclination is to hang on when God says, let go. Our natural inclination is to try and control the situation when God says, let me be in control. In other words, you have to go against your natural inclination in order to trust the Lord. Many times. Now, with that in mind, in these two words, batak and chasa, let me quote another passage for you that will make a lot of sense now. Proverbs chapter 3, a very famous passage, 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. The word is batah, lean on the Lord. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but acknowledge Him and He will direct your path. What he's saying is saying, learn to lean on the Lord. And there are times when you're doing that, you cannot lean on your own understanding. It'll be the opposite. You're learning to trust. You're learning to trust by, at times, not all the time, but you're learning to trust at times by leaning away from your natural inclination. When somebody harms you, what is your natural inclination? To harm them back. But if you trust the Lord, you can't do that. When you lack something, what is your natural inclination? Is to try and grab something. But there might be times when you're lacking something. God says, I want you to start giving more. Trust me. So you have to go against your natural inclination. But if you're leaning on the Lord, that's where you're going to run. And in verse 5, I see the second point is what we call the ultimate act of trust. It is quoted by Jesus on the cross right before He died. Into your hands I commit my spirit. What an act of trust that was. Now think about Jesus for a moment before we dig into these words. Think about Jesus. He was God. He was Creator. But He laid all of that aside to become man. And the whole time He was man, if He spoke a word, it came to pass, didn't it? Even when He was being arrested and tried, and that whole night it was said of Him, had He just spoken a word, He could have called. He said it Himself, I could have called for thousands of angels to deliver me. In other words, I can do something about this. He said, this is the night that evil is reigning. He said that in the gospel in the Garden of Gethsemane. He said, this is your night when evil reigns. Wow, that's a contradiction. Everywhere Jesus went, wherever He met evil, what did He do? He rebuked it. It had to flee. But now He has to just let it have its way. He had to go the opposite direction, didn't He? When He's hanging on the cross, at any moment on the cross, Jesus could have gotten Himself down. Jesus could have delivered Himself. Jesus could have spoken a miracle word. Jesus could have wiped out all His enemies. He could have done it a number of ways, but He didn't. But He could have until this moment. The moment He's going to die. Because once He dies, I know this sounds, once He dies, He's dead. What does that mean? It means you can't do anything. Not even Jesus. So Jesus came right up to the point where He said, okay, I'm on the cross. I'm following through now. Lord, I'm about to let go of everything. I'm about to just surrender everything. And I can't save myself from this moment on. You have to save me. Notice what the psalm says. I believe this is not only because Jesus quoted it, but look how it fits right at the crucifixion. Jesus prayed this last words on the cross. Into your hand I commit my spirit. But notice what the rest of the verse says. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. What is it? In other words, He's saying, God, I'm giving myself to you, believing that you're going to buy me back. Believing that you're going to ransom me out of this. But I'm committing it into your hand. Now, what did He mean by spirit here in the psalm? What does He mean by spirit? And this is a hard word to define. I mean, we can tell you what the word is, but think about when Stephen was being stoned in Acts 7:59, he said, into your, I receive my spirit, Lord. Lord, I receive my spirit. It's a prayer when he's dying. What is he saying? He's saying, Lord, I'm about to die, so receive me. Ecclesiastes 12:7 says, the body will return to the dust from whence it came, but the spirit will return to God from whence it came. So you are more than a body. Inside, somehow, you are a spirit. I don't even understand this, and I think it's been rightly said, man is a spirit with a body. What is death? James 2:26. A body without a spirit is dead. 1 Thessalonians 5:23. God will sanctify you wholly, body, soul, spirit, preserving you blameless unto the coming of the Lord. And so there's this dimension of who we are that is spirit. And I like to put it this way. It is the non-physical part of you that is ongoing. What do I mean by ongoing? Well, it's not eternal because it had a beginning. And I believe God makes your spirit, soul, whatever, however we call it, immortal. But it is that part of you that goes beyond death. It's even hard to define, isn't it? I remember as a little boy when my dad was explaining to me, my grandpa had his arm cut off, and my dad had his leg amputated. And so as a little boy, I had these two great men, and men I admired more than any other men, my grandpa and my dad, even as a little boy. And yet there was something about their physical bodies that were not whole. And I remember asking my dad as a little boy, I said, well, when they cut off Grandpa's arm and when they cut off your leg, what did they do with it? I don't think he knew what they did with it, but he told me anyway. He said, they buried it. Oh, well then, are you buried, Dad? I mean, what a ridiculous question. You're right here talking to me. But yet, part of you is buried. And what if they cut off another leg? What if they cut off both arms and buried it? Would you be buried? At what point are you no longer you? And I was trying to figure out this whole concept that man is more than a body. You're a spirit. And here David, now David is in danger. He could die if this is Absalom's rebellion. But you know, there's another aspect here I want to encourage you with. When you're being hurt by somebody, when life turns on you and everything's falling apart, and you tell yourself, I got to trust the Lord. I can't lose control of my emotions and my spiritual life. I got to trust the Lord. Here's something I would encourage you to do. Give him your spirit once again. Say, Lord, I put my spirit in your hands. In other words, Lord, take care of my spirit through all this. Because one of the worst things that can happen to you when bad stuff goes on is you become bitter. That gets into your spirit. Or you become cynical, unbelieving. That gets into your spirit. We need to say, Lord, I commit my spirit to you. Lord, take care of my spirit. While I'm going through this, Lord, keep my spirit clean. Keep my spirit close to you. And certainly when we go through that doorway we call death, we say, Lord, take my spirit. And here's Jesus on the cross, and he's about to die, and he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And the word in the Hebrew is pakah, and it means to deposit something for safekeeping. Think of that. He says, Lord, my spirit, I'm giving it to you to keep it safe, because I can't do anything with it now. What does it mean to commit? And there's another word, galal. It means to roll upon. In Psalm 37:5, commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, he shall bring it to pass. Proverbs 16:3, commit your works to the Lord, and your thoughts will be established. In other words, you turn over to God what you're doing, and he'll give you the right ideas. But what does it mean to commit? I'll put it really simple. It means to give in such a way you won't get it back. To give in such a way you can't keep controlling it. Sometimes we say, Lord, I give this to you, Lord. Now make sure you save them by 3 o'clock, because, no. If you give it, it's in his care. It's in his hands, and you can't just grab it back. He can give it back, but you can't grab it back. I commit it. And we're told to do this in 1 Peter 2:21-26. When you're suffering, just like Jesus didn't revile again, but he committed himself to his Father. He says to suffering Christians, you commit yourself to God when you're suffering. Give him your spirit. Give him your mind. Give him your emotions. Commit yourself to him. Give yourself over to him. 1 Peter 4:19 says, let them that suffer according to the will of God commit the keeping of their souls to him in well-doing as unto a faithful Creator. 2 Timothy 1:12, for I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I have committed unto him against that day. Here's what Jesus was thinking. I know this was on his mind. He's saying, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. That's trust. But see, he knew Psalm 31. Psalm 31 did not end with, into your hands I commit my spirit. It goes on to say, for you have redeemed me. You have ransomed me. In other words, God, you have said that you would cause me to rise from the dead. You have said that you would redeem me from hell, and I'm believing what you said, so I'm giving you my heart. I'm giving you my spirit. I'm letting go of everything. See, at that point, Jesus could not save himself. Only the Father could save him now, because he turned himself so completely over. This word, redeem, padat, means to release, to ransom, to buy back, to rescue. It's used about God getting them out of Egypt. It's used about God getting them out of Babylon. But it's also used about, messianically used about Jesus being redeemed from death. Psalm 49:15, but God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave, for he shall receive me. Psalm 16:10, for thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. Psalm 71, 20 and 21. You who has showed me great and terrible troubles shall quicken me again and bring me up again from the depths of the earth. Listen, I say, you made me go through all this terrible trouble, but Lord, you're going to cause me to come alive again. See, if I were to say to you, I want you to stop my heart. Stop it. Don't let it beat. Every electrical current in my body, stop it. Every bodily function, stop it. No, I'm going to die completely and you're in control, and I'm going to trust you to start it back up again. I'd say you better trust the person you're turning your body over to in that way. You better know they love you, and you better know they're qualified and able and capable. And here's Jesus on the cross. He could have spoken a single word and delivered himself, but he didn't. He chose to die. And that is the ultimate letting go of trust, saying, God, here I am. I'm putting my hands in, my spirit in your hands. But I'm sure in his mind he was also remembering, for you have redeemed me. Can you say that about your circumstance? God, I'm placing myself in your hands because you have redeemed me. Do you know if you're a born-again Christian, you have been twice purchased by the Lord. You are his twice over. You are his because of creation. He created you in your mother's womb, but he also redeemed you with his blood. You're his twice over. Say, Lord, so into your hand I commit my spirit. I'm just giving it over to you, Lord. And that will go at times against every natural inclination you have. But if we've been learning to lean, then we can run there. Last of all, I want to teach you a new word, and I'll only introduce it today. We'll have to study it again next week. What is the foundation of our trust? You see, if you're going to put your trust in the Lord, you need to say, well, what is it I'm basing that on? 4 times in Psalm 31, David uses a beautiful word. It's very hard to translate. It is the Hebrew word hesed. You can spell it out either with a CH or just an H, but it is hesed. It is in the Old Testament 249 times. It is in the Psalms more than half of that. So it's in the Psalms a lot. The NIV translates it the word love. King James translates it loving kindness or mercy. But I read out of the English Standard Version because I love the translation of this word hesed. It means steadfast love. Think of those two words, steadfast love. Love that doesn't vary. Love that never wobbles. Love that never changes. It's steadfast. And what is the foundation of our trust? Is the foundation of our trust the fact that God is powerful? Well, we need to believe he's powerful, but that's not the foundation. The foundation is that he loves us. And that his love is steadfast. Now, this is an Old Testament word. It's very hard to translate. And many people have put it this way. It is the way God treats those with whom he's in covenant. Hesed describes the way God treats people that he is in covenant with. And so David said, I trust you, Lord. Literally, I'm transliterating now, taking some liberty, but it's as if he's saying, Lord, I trust you because I know you're in covenant with me. And you love me, and that love never changes. It's steadfast. Steadfast love. It's the way God treats those with whom he is in covenant. Now, I know this sounds like heresy. Don't stone me, at least for 3 weeks. Hear the rest of the series before you stone me. I know this sounds like heresy, but I've come to this conclusion. It's just my opinion, but I've come to this conclusion that God loves everybody, the whole world. He loves everybody in the whole world. I think all of us would agree on that. For God so loves the world, that's everybody. But I believe the love he has for those with whom he has covenant is deeper, is richer, is different. So how do you figure that? Well, I'll tell you, as a man, I know God has called me to love everybody. I mean, if I allow hate in my heart, I'm in trouble. I'm called to love everybody. As a man, I am to love everyone, and God can enable me to love everyone. But there's one person I love very special. There's one person I can love without limit. There's one person, the depth of my love for her can go on and on and on. I can give to her like I can give to no one else. I can trust her like I trust no one else. Why? Because I'm in covenant with her. And having come into covenant with her, somehow that allows my love to go deeper and further and without limit. And being in covenant with her allows me to trust. Because we're in covenant. And it's a death do us part covenant. It's I lay down my life for you covenant. When you enter into that kind of covenant, you have found the foundation of trust. And now this is the same word hesed that David uses about his own relationship with God, going through this terrible time that he's going through. He said, Lord, I rejoice in your steadfast love, your hesed. I rejoice in that. We'll talk more about this next week, but David knew a little bit something about that hesed. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, when he became king, he said, is there anyone still alive of the house of Jonathan? Because I want to show him mercy. And the word he used is hesed. And he found a crippled man, Mephibosheth. And he went and got him, even though Mephibosheth was his enemy. And he said, from this day on, I'm going to treat you like my son. You're going to eat at my table because of hesed. Because of that steadfast love. And when we share communion today, what are we celebrating? We're celebrating how Jesus so trusted his Father, he would die on a cross, saying, into your hands I give my spirit. But what was he doing when he did that? He was making a covenant for you and I, so that we can trust him. You know, I saw something in the Scriptures I hadn't seen before, and I don't even know how to articulate it. I haven't really pondered it enough, but I'm just going to throw it out there for your consideration. I believe that in his humanity, in his incarnation, he was always God, always will be God, but he became man, and that limited his knowledge in his incarnation. And there was this growing awareness of his messiahship. And there were a few experiences that we mark them down as turning points in his ministry. It is at his baptism and the Mount of Transfiguration, where the voice of the Father said, you are my son. See, he needed to hear that. You're my son. But did I quote it right? Did I accurately quote it? That's the way I always quote it in my mind. You're my son. But that's not what God said. God said, you are my beloved son. You are my beloved son. There's two things I want you to know, Jesus. You are my son. And I love you. That's why he could trust the Father. Because he knew he was God's son, but he knew how much he was loved by God. Into your hands I commit my spirit. Now that's all the gospel records of what he said in his last word. Into your hands I commit my spirit. But what did the psalm say? For you have redeemed me. You have ransomed me, like Hosea said, I will ransom you from the power of death. I close with this story. So musicians, could you come and get ready for the communion? And I close with this story. Chuck Swindoll tells the story of the underground church in the Soviet Union when it still had to meet in secret and they couldn't openly worship back in those days. And there was this one group meeting and they were just starting to very quietly sing. When all of a sudden, and I don't know how many of them were gathered there, all of a sudden the doors burst open and in came two soldiers with automatic weapons. And they yelled at the people and they said, get up against that wall. And so they all crowded over to the wall. The soldiers pointed their guns at that small congregation. And then they said, whoever would like to renounce your faith in Jesus Christ, you can leave now. And some of them left. And they did it one more time. They pointed their guns at those believers. And they said, if you want to save your life by renouncing Jesus, you can leave now. It's your last chance. And a few more left. About half the group remained in that room facing the soldiers. And they were hugging each other. They were hugging their children. They were waiting for the bullets to start flying. They thought they were going to die for Jesus. It was at that point the soldiers put their guns down and said, we have become followers of Jesus too. We want to join a church, but we have learned that we cannot trust anyone who's not willing to die. So anybody in that room that was not willing to die, they didn't want to entrust themselves to them. We know we need a church. We need to be baptized. We need to live out our faith, but we can't, being soldiers especially, we can't trust anyone who's not willing to die. But we see you're willing to die. We're believers too. Can we join your church? We have learned not to trust anyone who's not willing to die. And I close by telling you this. You can trust Jesus because he did die. Not just a human death. He died under the wrath of his Father. He took your hell. He took your sin. He took your punishment. And he did it trusting his Father as the ultimate example for you and I to learn to trust.